for sticking around for this. Very excited to talk about, I'm going to be stationary, which is really hard for me, if you can imagine, after my talk earlier today. But I have a great panel of my friends here, and we're going to talk about just like being senior security professionals, being CISOs, being people in different walks of life and different industries and different sizes, kind of like what our experience is. And so I have some questions that we all kind of sat around and talked about, certain topics that we're going to kind of bounce around, but I really want this to be interactive. I want you to be able to ask questions, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll have somebody run over with a microphone to you, because we want to kind of keep this thing rolling. Because you don't need to hear us listen to all this stuff all the time, especially me. You're sick of listening to me. But what's really great on panels, so we have Bobby, Mona, Noah, and Josh, all good friends of mine, that represent different organizations in different stages, right? Because within cybersecurity, we have different maturities, regardless of your industry, regardless of your size, how mature your security program is very important. And so some of us are in very large organizations that have decades-old programs that are very mature. Some are maturing, like Bobby is, and Noah, we were talking about, is just learning how to eat solid food. As he's getting the machete, he's learning things up. But it's coming along great. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through some different topics that we're going to kind of bounce around and talk about. I know we have one microphone that we're going to have to share amongst each other, kind of like the talking stick in camp, right? And I'm going to kind of start out with the first kind of the theme. We talk a lot about like new technology. AI has been a thing we talked about a lot today. And, what we as people responsible for protecting organizations, what our kind of theme is like, it really comes down to doing the basics well. So I'm going to go pass it off, and it's like, let's talk about the things that are the fundamentals that we think that are kind of either overlooked or missing, or what more organizations should really focus on. And I'll use that as the first launch out there. Noah, you got the talking stick. Is it on? It's on. He said it's on. Ah! Does somebody know anything about technology on this panel?
No. It's working now, Noah. There you go.
Okay, it's on now. Yep, you got it. Got to project, Noah.
So, kind of going back to Rick's talk earlier over lunch, right? There's a preponderance of neurodiversity within cybersecurity, so we do get attracted by the shiny object, and we tend to run to it, like generative AI. But really, when you break it down, depending on where you are in your maturity journey with an organization, it's going back to the basics, right? So, kind of establishing the framework you want to operate under. Identify, know your environment, right? There is a security poverty line where some organizations don't. That's your first step, because if you can't identify, you can't do protect, detect, respond, or recover, right? So you have to focus on the basics before you try to jump to light speed and use generative AI to speed up or enhance your security program.
Okay, I apologize. I've been having those very bad allergies and been coughing so much, but if you don't understand, I don't blame you. But I totally agree with, the Rick and going basics, right? Doing the threat modeling, just to know your what are your risks, right? Having your what frameworks and what compliance and regulatory you are applying. So that's something that, we're gonna be having some more discussion about it. I'm gonna pass it to you.
I think a lot of people, when they come into cybersecurity, they think they're going to be sitting in a dark room, actively fighting against Russian cyber attacks. And I think for reality becomes that what we're mostly doing is just enforcing policies and procedures, making sure our policies and procedures are up to date, emailing managers, explaining why that their staff has to go through them to get access to new folders and new access to data. So that's mostly what our main focus is on. And not the sexy tools and features that are purchased each day.
Mm-hmm.
What I always think is interesting about these topics, and I've got young kids, and I'm always thinking about that movie, The Cruthirds, and they're like, it's new, and we all get excited about it, but also scared of it. It's new, it's scary, it's going to somehow like, leap out and kill us. And we've been around this. We went through this when cloud was new, and we're like, it's new, it's scary.
And
then
wireless and mobile.
and all these things, right? So whenever we're dealing with these new things, what I always find is interesting is that our security principles remain the same. Where is our data? What is our data doing? Where is it going? Do you know where your data is going? How are you stopping your data from going where you don't want it to be? Looking at the basics in terms of your attack surface management. Do you know what your actual surface is? Have you turned off the things you don't need? Do you leave things exposed? Are they vulnerable? What are the basic things you're doing? And it doesn't have to be new and scary. Maybe it's different. Maybe there's something new tweak you need to learn about it. But it's still about knowing where your data is and where your data is going.
Yep, no, exactly. And I think that there's a good a recent book, my friend Rick Howard, about the security first principles, which is like it all comes back to these basic principles. But one of the things that kind of has evolved is like the scale and the speed of change. The scale and the size of our infrastructures moving to the cloud, the scale and amount of adversaries that are more organized, and the rapid change in like their new types of attacks, and also changes within the organization, such as like a transformation to the cloud. And in threat intelligence, it's about the volume and velocity of information that is coming in to be able to analyze. And so knowing that we're all in like some of in different stages, like what does the speed and the scale, how does that impact your approach in looking at your program?
When I was first getting involved in things, when we had a new vulnerability that came in, you would have days to evaluate it, understand it, know what the impact was, long before you had anyone begin to take advantage of that vulnerability and begin to exploit it. And what we've seen is that threshold has really moved. Now, when a new patch is released, within hours, it's already been reverse engineered, and it's already been added into some new automated network to look for all the areas where it can begin to be exploited immediately. So with us being so resource constrained across all of our different sectors and industries and companies, we are going to have to start getting smarter about how we can scale through tools and automation, and trusting those tools to help us.
Yeah, so I'm going to keep referencing kind of your neurodivergence, right? So the threat actor is predominantly neurodivergent too, right? And what we're seeing with speed and scale in our industry is the same that we're seeing across life, right? Look at our kids and how we digest information now. All of the various different 5-minute microsegments of data from YouTube, unfortunately TikTok, others, right? So you have to take, and I'm sure Mona will agree, a risk-based lens to that. There's some element where you can't do it all. If you try to do it all, you're going to fall flat on your face, right? So it's how do you risk prioritize the information that are applicable to your organization, and then succinctly dedicate your resources to attack and remediate that.
Yeah, so the speed and scale, in different perspective, it has two different factors, right? You have the funding. You can't just kind of scale up. You have a requirement, right? And then and then you have those risk rating. What needs to be, you need to the cloud is very dynamic. Are we having which data we are just kind of migrating? Based on all of those, I would say just, risk prioritization, and then that's how we kind of play the role that, how the next steps and the actions going to play out. Just going to keep it to minimum. So
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay. Sometimes when you get to the bombs, like, yeah, they all said everything. That's why I also kind of repeat. So Mona, you brought up a very good point about the scale is not just from what we need to do to protect ourselves, but also like in funding. And in funding, it requires us to talk to leadership to acquire more and kind of justify that and educate them that, hey, we're not trying to do everything. We're trying to prioritize those important things. And, Noah, you'd asked the question in my thing about how do we properly talk to the board in being able to do that? So what are some of the tips that you all have used to be able to articulate that to senior leadership to help get the support to be able to do the basics and all the things prioritized and risk-based that we want to do to be successful, knowing the world that we're in?
Well, I think we, excuse me, lost train of thought there. I think it's not just IT, it's all of security has problems talking to anybody outside of security. So I think the first part is to find that person on your team, or if it's not you, that has the best communication skills to be able to talk to people outside of IT. Just like if you're looking for the best developer, the best data analyst, you find somebody who's good at that skill. If it is you, then knowing your audience, knowing who you're talking to, figuring out who that person is and what they're looking for. I know for me, my direct leadership, they want to know how it relates to risk. What my project I'm bringing to them, how it relates to risk. And when I go to them, I'm not asking for a certain amount of funding. I'm not asking for a certain project. I'm saying this is the risk. Are you willing to accept that risk? And these are my solutions to that risk. And I'll always offer three different types of solutions: that gold, silver, and bronze. And this is my recommendation. This is the Cadillac. This is where I recommend we would go. And if we want to save money, we can go here. And here's the pros and cons of each. So it puts that power back in their hands. So they're getting to decide what's best for the business. And you're doing your role, which is supplying them with the knowledge they need.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always say, like, technical people don't make business decisions. We're the advisors to advise. Mona?
Yeah, so putting power back on the hands. First thing starts with actually the threat modeling. Mm-hmm. If you have your data ready, right, what you need is just your assets identification, right? Finding what the risks are and the threat, whatever those, the landscape and what are your threats, and analyzing of your threats, and now your ranking of your threats, and then now you can actually, they understand mostly the business or the board of director about the money. What you can tell, this is what this gonna lead it to this regulatory problem. This is what and this is what, and then probably if you have some legal and some other data to back up, you have very solid reason that why you need to do it. And this is all those things that, you have your modeling with all the threats and open findings.
Yep.
So for me, there are kind of different levels of communication and different levels of education that have to happen on each one. She's exactly right. It's got to be risk-based, right? But I do my metrics on an executive, managerial, and operational level. At your board level, you're going to want to keep it higher level, kind of bullet points talking about the environment, the risk, no more than a handful of metrics, because you just don't want them deep diving in those areas. That's not where you want to take the conversation, right? With your executives, sometimes they need a little more. I don't work at a large financial organization, right? So sometimes there's some education there about what is that? What is zero trust? Trying to describe that succinctly in like an elevator pitch is pretty hard, right? So a good way to do that is I found that everything in the digital world has a physical counterpart. You heard that earlier today on the CrowdStrike talk when he was talking about multi-factor authentication. Think about when you go to the airport, right? Where are you going? Who are you? Show me this. All right, you're accessed and authorized to get on the plane, right? So making those educational items in language they understand goes a long way with making your message resonate about risk, right? Because then you can pivot to, if we don't do that, here's the risk.
Businesses need to stay in business. And businesses don't do that without taking risks. They do that. This is their language. This is how they make decisions, whether it's to decide on a new product line or decide on a next project or whatever it is they're going to do. They're making risk-based decisions. We don't need to take threats to them and scare them and talk about some sort of, something coming out of the sky and it's going to come and attack us or do this or that or so on and so forth. We have to take what we know about security and translate that back into the language that they use to make decisions every day. We have to make it a risk-based approach. We have to let them make a choice about what risks they can accept, what risks they can't accept in order to stay in business. And we have to be okay with that. If we are not okay with that, if we look at that and we're like, but it's a hole and it needs to be plugged, and that's our response, then we're not the right person in that conversation, or we need to retrain our way we think about things so we can have that proper conversation.
Yeah, and that's why I would tell people, like, you have executives, you have three choices. You can accept, mitigate, or transfer. Ignoring is accepting. And sign here, by the way, that you choose to accept that. So that when they come after me, them like, they signed off on it. Technical people don't make business decisions. One of the biggest, risk, and it's a good point, Josh, about like the FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. How often, we here in the States have for generations been sold everything through FUD. If I don't drink this beer, I won't get the girl. If I don't drive this car, I won't be accepted by my peers. It's just like we're conditioned to it. And you really notice that if you go overseas and how it's not that way and how they really are comfortable with that. But one of the things that is a concern that we have not really had a handle on for decades is third-party risk management. What are we doing? And I've talked to two people already today about like third-party questionnaires and things that we go through. Like, how do we? I'm in a very big company, so I'm usually the questionee as opposed to the questioner, except for the questionee. And so, but that's something that we continue to struggle with, and just want to kind of get everyone's view from where you sit and your perspective on where we need to go with third-party risk management, what's wrong, what do we think, we need to do about it. Not that we're going to solve it in the next 5 minutes. Unless somebody wants to, then that would be great, and we'll make the headlines. Third-party risk is the question. If I did, yeah. Everyone's.
I think in part, when you are regulated versus more of a non-regulated space, that question's kind of already
the
answered.
Non-regulated guy sits back like, what do I know?
I'm going to hand it to you in a second, right? Because you still care about it, but maybe not the same way that like Mona and I care about it, right? Where from a regulatory perspective, we have to treat our third parties as an extension of ourselves. And what data we share with them, we have to expect that they're going to protect it at the same rigor and caliber that we do. And so our programs have to be mature. They have to really get deep into what those programs are and whether or not those programs are doing the right things. And we have to do regular checks and assessments and considerations of that. But I think we've all seen that our third parties, no matter where you are, whether you're a regulated financial services or another environment, manufacturing, I've seen a few folks here that are providing like a home-based services for getting your hammer in your nails, things of that nature, right? We're all concerned about our third party because we saw in the last few years just how much of those third parties or even legal partners are being compromised by just the rapid pace of development of looking for the vulnerabilities and taking advantage of those vulnerabilities.
So my little neurodivergent brain in my non-regulated industry is just firing off like crazy now. But for us, we have to take it from a different perspective, right? We're not regulated, so you're going to hear me say it a lot. We approach it on the basis of risk, right? In a manufacturing company, we make widgets. We make a whole lot of different types of widgets, but we have a lot of suppliers in that, so we have a lot of third parties. But not every one of them needs a cybersecurity program. If they produce a wiring harness for us, they have no connectivity to our environment, they have no access to our environment. We order wiring harnesses, they ship them, we pay them. That's a low risk one. I'm really not concerned about how advanced their $5 million wiring harness business is from a cybersecurity perspective. Now, when you get into HR third parties, Milliman, who does pension aspects, right? And the recent Move IT, hey, I had my first exposure to fourth party risk, right? So somebody that we outsource to Milliman outsources, right? And they contacted us from the Move IT aspect, right? Or they contacted some of our retirees because they manage pension plans. So you have to assess each one on the basis of risk and then evaluate how deep do you need to go on that. And then you're absolutely right. You can't just do it at a snapshot in time and be like, okay, well, they're good for the rest of the time. Whoa.
Just saved your life, John.
Yeah. Flair doesn't like you. So I hope you got that, but ultimately it's all a risk-based approach to it.
Yeah, just my two quick at the point here. Either we are regulated or not regulated, it's very important that we do. If it's any PII data is involved, there are similar kind of the controls you should expect from your third or fourth or fifth party that are they following, right? You should have all your controls in place in order for you to check infosec language in your contract, very important. Make sure you revise your contract, look at it. Sometimes you might have the expired contract. So if anybody is in a vendor management, you want to just make sure that's on your routine check or some kind of the reminder that would actually keep those checkpoints, contract, infosec language, right? Having legal team involved, having infosec language added, because if you don't expect it, they're not going to fulfill it. You can't come ask them to do something, right, what you expect, right? If you have your organizational policies that set in risk, if they have having some PII data, right, they have to have some kind of those the controls in place, and they should able to prove they are in compliance with your control. So it's very, very important.
In healthcare, I think we make sure all of our vendors follow a certain set of standards, same as we do, so that part's easy. It goes back to our first topic, which is following policies and procedures, making sure there's a clear set of instructions of what you expect out of your third-party vendors, to make sure that you have checks and balances in place, that your staff or your company is making sure that whatever's in your policies and procedures, that you're following those.
Yeah, I think, Bobby and I are in healthcare, and so I actually think we have it a little easier because in HIPAA and high tech, we have business associate agreements, which kind of like we have to make sure we lock them in, and we are accountable as the covered entity of any third, fourth, fifth party. Anything happens, the new SEC rules talk about that, but we've been dealing with that with healthcare. But unfortunately, I think that, as we talked about, this is not a really mature, no one's really doing it great. It's less about third-party risk management, more about third-party liability management. Like, okay, we have it in the contracts, we check them, we did our due diligence, anything happens, we're kind of covered. But it's interesting how we kind of address everything. And you kind of brought up a thing about like following the policies that are defined. That goes to us internally as well, right? We kind of talked about this earlier, separately about when we go back to the basics and trying to do the fundamentals, it's like, let's do the things that we already wrote down that we agreed we should be doing in the first place. And so, maybe talk about like struggles that we're having with just doing not just the basics, but the things that we already have policies and procedures for.
I just want to make a quick joke.
Please.
Where I was following on there's a physical representation for everything digital. With this sign, you just saw an autonomous takedown of Josh.
Now I've forgotten the question. Thank you.
I tried.
Following the policies that you're like, following the thing, because following the things you already written down and agreed you were going to do in the first place, and where do we see challenges in just like doing the things we already decided we were going to do?
It's great to have things written down. Do you have it in the hands of the right people?
Right.
Is it getting to the right people in the right time for them to know what they are and follow them? If you have them all just sitting there in a consolidated place, but you're never directing your developers, you're never directing your technologists, you're never directing people to them to see them, then it's not very useful. It's maybe useful when you do find something and you can slap their hand, but you need to have them where they're actually being in a position where it's getting to people when they need it, how they need it.
Yep.
So I'm going to get real. That's the hard part of IT, right? So from cybersecurity, we write standards, we write policy, and then we tell infrastructure and operations, hey, go comply, and now I'm going to report on how bad you did, right? That doesn't make us a lot of friends. Part of my career was an audit, so it's how do you develop the partnerships to make sure that you're not creating silos and animosity between IT operations, IT, and cybersecurity, because you all really want to pull in the same direction. So how can you report that, be factual about it, get that information to management, whether that be about tech debt, supportability, patching, or various different security stacks on your endpoints. And then you got to have the honest conversations with your executives about what the risk is and how can you improve your compliance with what you state that you already do.
Yeah, I'll just kind of repeat, what you just said. Having policies and control in place is the number one, the key to stay on top of it. So being said that, what does it mean that all the policies you have to be keep up to date, refreshing it, having proper standards. Policy is very high level. Standard is another little technology high, but the procedures or the controls having more detailed, step by step, right? So how you revise, how you test your controls, RCSA, and your controls are effective. Does it meet the risk and threat, of your what's your the tolerance level for your organization. This is all kind of goes in input, and then how you kind of take actions, but always keep refreshing all of those. All the standards, like NIST CSF 2.0 just came out a few weeks back, so just staying up to date, not just copying those controls, but how you tailor for your organization. That would actually be a really great idea.
I think it all goes back to communication with business leaders, with department heads. We have security committees that include business leaders from each one of the departments to be able to get their input, to be able to explain this is what's going on, this is why this is important. That way, they're answering their staff's questions and complaints when we implement new multi-factor authentication. Everything's not coming back to security, and we get more of a buy-in from them because as we're sitting there trying to decide what we need to implement, they get to put their input in, and they get to know why what needs to be done has to be done.
Yeah, when I was a virtual CISO, I used to go into organizations and say, it's like, hey, how do you know to do this? It's like, oh, we have a policy for it. It's like, do you follow it? No. It's like, so you know it, but you're not following it. As opposed to some people's like, well, it's like, I don't know, we just do it this way. So, well, I know you have a policy, so it's not educated. Kind of like to your point, Josh, it's like it's there, but sitting on some SharePoint that we can go point to, but it's not socialized and trained for people to be able to follow it, to be able to do that. I'm going to pause here for questions. I said at the beginning I want this to be interactive, and then I spent 30 minutes just talking. But, I get distracted for some reason. So if you have any questions, raise your hand. We will get a microphone out to you, and I will pause for 30 seconds for someone to do that. And then I will ask a question. I will continue going. Because sometimes it takes a little bit. Yes, there we go. We have a taker.
All right, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask a slightly inflammatory question here. For years, we used to say that CIO is where your career goes to die. And then CIO became influential, and then we started saying that CISO is where your career goes to die. And lately, I think, at least in the COVID era, that's no longer the case, and that now it's a really exciting place to be. What are your thoughts on that subject?
If this is my career dying, I'm very, very happy. Like, I get to play three-dimensional chess with an invisible opponent. It's like I'm in the Big Bang Theory every day. So, it's a lot of fun. To me, it's a little more dynamic. I've had conversations with senior leadership about my development. I don't want to leave this role. It's the one that's the most challenging to me. It's the one that allows me to be a little more accepted as a neurodivergent and be a little spastic. HR isn't as hard on us, too, because they really don't know what we do, right? When IT started, right, it was, when you go back to, the dot-com bubble, when the CIOs were kind of, oh, wow. Nobody really knew what it was. It was like a magic black box. People didn't really understand IT, right? Now that's been operationalized over 20 years. Cybersecurity is the new black box, so it means they accept a little more quirky people. So I don't know that I could go mainstream. So if this is where my career goes to die, I'm super happy.
I appreciate you taking that first. That was awesome. I had a moment to think about that, and I don't know any CISOs where their career just ended there. Everybody I know that has had that role or taken that role, and maybe they've moved out of that role from one company to the next for various reasons, either voluntarily, non-voluntarily. You look across Charlotte, we have so many CISOs here in Charlotte. And they're all doing really amazing things, both in their current career and their current roles, but then also kind of in their roles as they exit and move on. They're providing a lot of guidance to younger generations. They're providing guidance to boards. They're providing additional services either through expanding their role and influence by going the vCISO route. And now they're helping more companies and not just one company. I don't see it as a place where you go and it's a role where you go until something bad happens and then you have nothing else left to do. No, even the bad things. You talked about failure earlier today and learning from failure. And I love how all of us have learned from different failures and different problems. We've never simply gone into security to expect, an even, well-paved road to success, right? We came in for the chaos. We came in for the fight. You talk about 3D chess with an unseen enemy. That's what we came for. We came for the thrill of the chase and the thrill of what we need to try and block and tackle.
Yeah, it's like it's hard to trust a CISO hasn't been through a nation-state attack. It's like you lived through it. That's valuable. It's not something to be criticized. Mona, we're good? Okay. Yeah, and same thing, like expanding on my perspective on it is that, in the CISO world, when I was a virtual CISO, I was helping many companies get their first CISO. And one of the executives in a Mexican company said, what's the career path of a CISO? Do they want to be a CIO or CTO or whatever? I said, no, they want to be a CISO of a big organization. Or go off and be a grandparent and be a virtual CISO where you get to give the baby back at the end of the week, at the end of the weekend. So yeah, I can't move because where you just get to be a virtual CISO and don't have the responsibility. But like Josh says, it's to expand it, but you never actually ever leave it. So yes, it's not to go to die, but to go off to pasture. I'm sure there's this great to a farm somewhere. I don't know. There's an analogy in there somewhere.
I'm too young to die.
Right.
I think one part of that question that where you're coming from there, right, is, with respect to.
I can move around now.
There we go. I appreciate that.
It's probably best.
I think one of the reasons why we look at that question and we have a little bit of fear and uncertainty around it is so many organizations are structured in a way to set the CISO up for failure, to set that person up to take the fall when something goes bad. And instead of setting up the organization in a way where the CISO is empowered to identify and raise up the risks to senior leaders, instead they're put in a place where if a CIO's number one job is to keep the systems available, and then when something goes down, now you can blame the security person, that's not a good spot to be in. And I think that we do have to take a hard look at how we structure organizations for success across all those platforms.
Yeah, and there's a maturity aspect to it, which I think is very important because when I would come into an organization, they would say, it's like, yeah, I'm here to be fired when something goes wrong. It's like, then you need governance to be able to transfer the risk because technical people don't make business decisions and there's a steering committee that makes the final choice and you signed off on the risk from the business and you're like, when they come down the hallway with the pitchforks and the torches because something happened, you say, hey, I told them not to, they accepted the risk, here's a sign off, they go down to the other end of the hall and go after the business people.
So I would say that mindset is starting to change though, of when the bad thing happens, they just get rid of the CISO, right? If you look at SolarWinds, there couldn't have been a worse thing that happened, and he's still there, right? And they gave him many accolades for how he handled that and the level of stress that he went through. There's a benefit to organizations for CISOs that have been battle tested too and been through that, and they want somebody that's experienced that so they don't freak out because you don't know until you're in it what it's like. And Rick, just to say, I was supporting your neurodiversity by letting you move, so that was me giving you the mic.
Thank you. Like the audience would rather have me stay here, otherwise I'll be down in the booths or walking around and whatever. Any other questions before I move on? So you talked about 3D chess, Noah, and with the adversaries. And the adversaries are getting a lot more, they have been a lot more organized. We need to organize. They are becoming a lot more advanced. We talked about the pace of change and velocity. Josh, you talked about how they're very quick to weaponize things when it comes up, when there's new exploits out there. How do we feel about that? So what's our perspective on these more advanced adversaries? And what about, my standard rant is there's the Fortune 500 and then 5 million other companies. We in the Fortune 500 have resources, money, and people, and nobody else does, but that's 99.99999% of the infrastructure. And so, but they have the same fight that we have. They have the same adversaries we have. They have the same things, but they don't have the resources to be able to do something about it. So what are your individual perspectives on more advanced adversaries, them being organized, and how it kind of like, does everyone need to worry about that no matter how big or small? Did I ask too many questions? You can just take one of those. I know I kind of like...
You gave us a lot there.
Yeah, I know you gave a lot.
I was at one company, and I'm sure other companies say this is not probably an exclusive to that one company, but we were fond of saying, like, you know, they only have to be right once, and we have to be right 100% of the time, right? So I think I want to take the part about whether or not, you know, our companies need to worry about these adversaries, and that's kind of a question of, well, maybe. What is it that your company has that might be interesting or useful? You have some adversaries that are simply interested in, you know, causing chaos. They're just interested in getting in and then taking everything down, and perhaps for being able to show off their capabilities. You have others that are extremely interested in the information that you have, and if you're a company that's, you know, dealing with a lot of IP, intellectual property, you know, you're really focused on, I need to protect this, because there's entire adversaries that are focused on just taking that information and not having to have any R&D budget for themselves, right? And so for all of us, it's about what is it that we need to protect. If you're as some sort of manufacturer, and if your machine goes offline and then everything kind of solidifies inside that machine, you have to go through a cleaning process or replace the entire machine. Availability and uptime is absolutely your concern, right? Not so much maybe, you know, information or other things, but that machine has to be up and running. So I think for us, it's about understanding who is our adversary. What is it we're trying to protect against? So that way we can focus and we can, again, go back to that risk-based decision for the business.
You already said what Noah's going to say, because he is manufacturing. So I was going to say, take notes, Noah. What he said. Go ahead, Bobby.
I don't have a lot to add to it. I think part of that, being able to do what you can do with the funding you have, a lot of things have evolved as far as how we protect our networks. Right before the pandemic, I think a lot of us had the old guard of protecting the exterior network, make sure nobody got into our networks. I think now, as we start to evolve, we got to get into different tools, things that are more adaptive, things that can be more precise and geared towards your network, and being able to do that with the funding you have. So it's definitely a different conversation when you're talking about large organization versus what you have to work with. I think the goal is to make yourself just hard enough to get into that you become too much trouble and the hackers go on to the next organization.
Yeah. So I guess when finding a bear in the campsite, you don't have to outrun the bear, just the other campers. That analogy.
So I think this one is interesting, right? Because like you mentioned, right, the predominant approach before, especially before COVID, was make your exterior super hard, right? Make it impenetrable. And the thing that I found the most resonance with our executives at this organization and others is like, okay, so my mindset has shifted. It's not if, but when you'll be compromised, because the adversary has grown leaps and bounds, just like our capabilities have. So if you do that and you start from the premise that you're compromised, what then becomes your priority? Is it really the protections that have already failed, or is it your speed of detection and response, right? So that when you ask that question, it kind of turns a light bulb on for me, like, oh, okay. And then based on risk, because that's the risk, that's where you make some of your investments. And that really helps. Now, the interesting part that you were talking about is the adversary is very advanced, and I'd say maybe we get a little bit different exposure in manufacturing. Like I talked about the wiring harness mom and pop shops, right? If the adversary can impact them, that can stop our production line, right? And that's why triple extortion works, right? So if they can stop our primary supplier for a small part that stops our manufacturing line, like that has impacts to us. So we have some responsibility, and I have a lot of conversations with our suppliers about low-cost cyber hygiene. As Rick knows, I volunteered at Paro for our not-for-profits. I've done webinars on low-cost cyber hygiene. Small things you can do to make sure that you're not the slowest one that the bear is after, right? And if I can do that for all my suppliers, then I've improved the overall security moat of my entire organization.
Yeah, I want to pull on something that Josh said about attribution. And so I think that and kind of get the opinion of others on this, that there's a discussion whether attribution is important. You said, like, I need to know who my adversary is, understand their opportunity, capability, and intent. Those are my words, to be able to know what I'm dealing with. And there's a lot of discussion, like when we talk about the haves and have-nots, whether like, hey, maybe for Noah, just like, I don't care who did it, just what happened, how it happened, make it stop, make it doesn't happen again. And, we, being in larger or more funded organizations, want to know who they are. And I say that with my lead cybersecurity intelligence analyst here in the room, of like, we know very much who they are, what they're doing, which neighborhoods they're in, whether they're going after, where they've changed, and we share that with the world. But we can afford to do that, and we have the expertise to do that. Do we think that that's something that is important to the 5 million, or is it just to the benefit of the Fortune 500?
I think in one part, when I'm talking about that, it was articulated better here on the table with respect to, what are the things you care about? Is it that one machine? Is it your intellectual property? And understanding, what types of adversaries are going to be going for that, and looking at those areas in terms of, again, your
so the broad
focus
brushstrokes of these are ransomware, these are people who do DDoS, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and certainly there are more services available to, say, like the financial services in terms of the way in which we do information sharing. But other industries have information sharing networks that can assist as well, that even smaller companies within those industries can take advantage of. The healthcare industry, for example, has your healthcare ISAC as well, which is very well managed. Mm-hmm. And with respect to that, you can get a lot of information to help your organization too. And so building those communities that can help share and help protect, because we're all looking to try and make sure that our industries are not a target.
Right.
I'm just going to add it, sometimes we are compelled, we are regulated, we are highly regulated. Mostly the financial services and the healthcare, and small corporations, probably whatever the budget and scale, size of they have it. But if they have to do it, then only we do it. We don't do it because we are very, strict privacy laws, and if data breach, it's just fine to the OCC and FRB. That's what we are doing it. Otherwise, we didn't do it in the past that great, in the past time. So it's just something I'm adding it. So it's just something we are forced, and that's the reason behind it, and it's good for. The consumers or the whoever is used by our services. So that's just
Yeah, because I think that what has evolved when they start monetizing ransomware at scale in the last 5 years, that no one is immune, because I can make money off of lots of little hospital systems that I know are insecure, and I'm going to get onesie twosies, and those are lots of slow people in the campsite. And, whereas before, maybe 10 years ago, it was for IP, for money laundering, for using resources to do Bitcoin mining or whatever. But now I have a nice, easy way to monetize it. Bobby?
Just to answer that question, I think as a medium-sized company with a smaller budget, and with a few security incidents under my belt, I can say that during those incidents, it barely crossed my mind of who it was. It didn't matter, and we didn't have the resources to find out. It was just,
right.
How do we stop it? How do we clean it up? What can we do to try to keep it from happening again? Because we know we don't have the funding to guarantee it won't happen. We can just fix that, fix the holes that were there, that let them in, and try to put as many safeguards in place.
Yeah, when I was, worked in the defense industrial base, when we were trying to educate, and this was 13 years ago, other industries on threat intelligence, we kind of like put it into 4 categories. That you're either a spectator, which means like, even if I gave you some threat intel, you wouldn't know what to do with it, or where to put it or apply indicators. You could be a consumer, which you'll say, oh, thank you very much, I'll put this in my controls and my new detections. You could be a contributor, it's like, hey, I developed this thing and I'm sharing with the industry. Or you can be an intelligence source at the highest level where, hey, not only here are the things, but this is the why and the who and why and who they're working with and all that kind of thing. And so when we were first dealing with the big banks in 2010, they're like, I just want to be consumers, I don't care. Until 2015 and JP Morgan Chase. And they're like, what was that thing you were telling me about, that the WHO? And there was a big brain drain from Washington, D.C. to Wall Street of all the defense industrial base, leadership, because it's like they realize the importance of knowing who it is. And that's where I worry as that, poverty line of the haves and have-nots of like, hey, well, we understand this and we'll be able to help it to inform our strategy, and how do we propagate it to those who would only be spectators anyway to help in some way to consume it. Open up to questions, or particularly if you disagree with anything we said, we'd love that even more. Yes? He's gone. He is behind you. He's potting it up behind you. Up. AV issue. Yep, all right. All right, yeah. No one wanted to get his steps in because he's only at like 7,000 today.
He was telling me to shut up, and he didn't want to hear me. NATO recently has included or defined cyber as a formal tenet of warfare. I believe that if cyber is the first blow of the next war, that die's already been cast. How do you feel?
Oh, yeah, no question. I mean, and just be fair, we're also, as an offensive entity, we are also in all these places as well. But yes, and that is a thing that we talk about on the industry of, looking at it from a macro view. It's what can an adversary do at scale to harm us and are already embedded and have persistence in certain places to be able to like turn that on. Yeah, that's kind of like a understood risk that we've kind of accepted and kind of hope we never have to worry about. Or maybe the mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, mutually assured destruction.
Happens because we will give it worse than anybody else can give it to us.
So, from my perspective, right, that's why Jen Easterly and the CISO organization kind of exists. It's really, we have to focus in on our critical infrastructure and make sure that we're certainly prepared. But I think you've seen already some first forays into that from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, right? There's been some blowback from that against U.S.-based companies based on activities they took as a result of that, right? So I think that's a natural progression, if you will. I think another interesting question there is, right, with the generative AI question that everybody talks about, is eventually that has to devolve into the table stakes are generative AI blue team defenses, generative AI red team attacks,
Yep.
right? And then we have to think about ourselves and where do we fit in that industry, right? Because I like that movie Hidden Figures, where they come in, where they used to do all the calculations for landing on the moon, right? And they did them manually. And then they brought in the supercomputer from IBM. And they had to reinvent who they were, right? So as generative AI grows, where do we continue to add value as an organization of cybersecurity professionals? I think that's something we got to keep our focus on moving forward as well.
Noah's our buzzword guy on the panel because he said zero trust and generative AI. So, right, yeah, for all the bingo cards out there. Did you have anything that you want to say about this topic, or if you don't want to? Okay, so he's behind you.
Yeah, so...
this is Woody. He is our lead threat intel analyst from the intel community. He knows about such things.
Yeah, to what you're saying about cyber being the first bullet fired, that's absolutely, I think that's already true. People say that the first strike in a war is going to be against airstrips and taking down aircraft. No, the first strike is going to be against network infrastructure. Then kinetic was going to happen after that. And we've seen not only the United States start to gear that way. We have a Dernza, director of the NSA, who is from Cybercom, and I think that's going to persist from here on out. We've seen the Chinese Ministry of State Security completely refactor how they are gearing cyber. Cyber is now its own branch in the Ministry of State Security. And we're seeing that in Russia as well. Of course, you mentioned the Russian war in Ukraine and how they've leveraged that as sort of a first strike. So I think the nation states of the world have already kind of aligned to what you're talking about.
But Russia's been testing on Ukraine for over a decade.
Right. Well, what was interesting for me is when, everybody was asking me when the Ukraine war starts, like, hey, are you seeing activity? And me and my peers are like, at my level, the Fortune 50 company, like, we're not seeing anything. It's like, it's Chinese New Year, Russians are occupied with Ukraine war. We're like, our plate's clean at this point. What I didn't realize was my friends way down the supply chain, all of my friends who are CISOs at county governments, at hospitals, and all of this low-hanging fruit, they were getting hammered by those. So they just like, okay, we're the people who are the sprinters that are in the campsite, the bear is literally ignoring them and just eating all the people still sleeping. So it's also the who where it comes in. Any other questions?
Great question.
But yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you for the assist, Woody. I figure it's like we have like a expert in the room. Let him answer it. So anybody else for a couple seconds before I start asking questions again? Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
Commentary. As an organization that is below that poverty line, I do appreciate your efforts at turning around and shooting the bear. So.
Yeah. Well, we're not shooting the bear yet. We're not Title 10. There's a Title 10, Title 50 that doesn't allow to do that, but it's Woody's nodding. It's like, but maybe we'll work on that. But it's going to be a deterrent and kind of like, hey, we know, and we're aware because we're giving intelligence to them when those things are happening. So, but that is true. I want to go ahead and just start wrapping up. If anyone, have any of you have any like final comments or any other final questions on the topic or not, that's perfectly fine. As we've had a great day today, as hopefully as you all agree, and that we will close it out so that you can use your tickets more. Mona?
All right, so stay on top of all your the policies and standards. Stay on top of emerging risk, right? We just heard about it, the bad actor has to be only right one time, but we have to be always 100%. So keep up to date all of those, stay on top of, because the policy and standard, and whatever the CVE and, it's everything it's the bad actor also can able to see. So that's something that, you're kind of, it's a good and bad. So kind of what they also know it. So you got to be more smarter than them. So just to play your game you can't miss it. So, it's just always stay on top of it. Quantum computing and everything is not going to help, but the bad actors, they can break the keys, they can get into your cloud. Everything could happen. So have your strategies. So think about future goals and how you can handle and tackle those, the challenges coming in.
So my closing comments are going to be for transparency and openness. Unless I've misread the room, everybody here is on the blue team, right? But we don't do a great job at, you red team? You're totally coming in for the attacks? Fantastic. Yeah. I think you need to start tracking him. I'm just going to throw that out there. But it's for transparency, right? We have a pretty good community in Charlotte, right? But we need to talk more. Like Mona was saying, we have to be right 100% of the time. The more we stay in our little pillars and silos of our own individual organizations, the less we're talking with our communities, and that needs to happen at the CISO level. And there's a good CISO community in Charlotte, right? But as that goes down further, talk more, right? Share more. Protect your organizations. Don't overshare. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But give a heads up, right? If you've got some intel or information about what you're seeing and you have peers in other organizations, start talking to them about it. That's the one thing that'll make us all better.
I think I have two closing comments. I think one is that we all need to do a better job with helping companies get above that poverty line. And there are some resources out there that if you're not aware of them, if you're not thinking about them, if you're one of those companies, things that are already available through organizations like OWASP, organizations like the Global Cyber Alliance, with a nonprofit providing tool sets and techniques that you can use to help support your organization. And that one's I believe helped sponsored in many ways by MasterCard, right? So there are things out there that are already available. We need to do a better job of getting the information out there and sharing that information and getting people involved in these information sharing communities around both the threat intelligence, but also the tool sets and the techniques that are out there. The second thing I want to say is with respect to each of you individually, right? This is not necessarily a rocket science approach to what we're doing, where we've talked about the basics. Understanding your attack surface, understanding your data, and each of us have a good understanding of cybersecurity. We don't need to get wrapped around the axle around the new shiny thing, the Wi-Fi, the cloud, the AI, right? We need to do the right things every time and not panic about what's new and on the horizon, and then use that to our advantage and adapt to it. But each of us can take those lessons and learn to talk to the business in the language that they need, so that way they can understand where we're coming from.
And Bobby.
All right. No one told me they were going to put me on a panel with professional speakers. This is my first time talking in front of my peers like this, so forgive me. But just some closing comments. I think just to kind of wrap up the advice I kind of give everybody is to, the main focus of your security should be your risk log, your policy and procedures. Tie everything back to your risk log. Keep that risk log up to date. Keep your policies and procedures up to date. I know with our company, it takes months to get a new policy through. So to stay on top of that emerging technology, of the emerging threats, so that you can get a jump on it and have that policy in place before whatever that next threat may come out and become very popular.
Yeah, and I just want to final close with a foot stomp of community. It's like I have the cruise director name tag here because it's about bringing all the CISOs together. And even like here, we have this great diversity within Charlotte. And see Mike back there and Mike over there, and I know Sean came and left. It's like these are small organizations who can get the benefit of being with Fortune 50 companies who figured it out. And then sometimes they have interesting insight into their relationships as well. And so it's all about us kind of getting together. Like I always kind of say, the CISO community is a support group as much as it is like for information sharing. At some point, there's going to be crying and hugging at the end. And so we all are dealing with this together. But I want to first thank all of our panelists, Bobby, Bona, Noah, and Josh. And thank you all for your attention and sticking around for us. And have a great day.
Thank you guys so much. Go get yourself a drink.
Yep.
Tickets for the panel.
That's right. Well, I don't know if this is the moment you've all been waiting for, but we're doing it anyway. We're about ready to give some prizes away. Okay. We're going to start with a smart TV from Tract. And